Hey there, it's Lara here with your weekly astrology forecast. This one is for the week of June 23rd to 29th, 2021. Thanks for being here. You may have just heard my heat kick on because it's the end of June and it's freezing here. It was hotter than Hades like last week and now it's freezing. So my heat just kicked on. Hopefully that's not too loud for you. Anyway, today, we're going to talk about the full moon in Capricorn that is happening on Thursday. And I'm actually recording this on Tuesday, which is the day that Mercury stations direct. And I can tell you, Mercury's doing Mercury things as it stations direct around here. And this is like my third try at this. And then, the heat kicked on and I'm like, whatever. I'm just going with it. So, we'll just see what happens here, but maybe third time's a charm, right? So Mercury is stationing direct today as I'm recording this on the 22nd, Tuesday the 22nd. And Mercury is stationing at 16 Gemini, and it retrograded at around 24, 25 degrees Gemini on May 23rd. So now it's stationing direct, and it's going to start to move through those degrees that it's already passed over a couple of times for the third and final round, right? So it goes back and it's like, okay, it's like when this happens, Mercury's traveling through the sky and then it stops, or it appears to stop from our perspective on Earth. It doesn't actually, but, and it's like, oh, forgot something. I have to go back to a certain point to get that information, that intel, whatever it is, that it needs to remember, which is a Mercury retrograde word, and then, gets what it needs, stations direct, and starts to move back through those same degrees to go, okay, now I have the information that I need to sort this out, right? So it's going to leave that zone around July 8th, 9th, but when planets station retrograde or direct, that's when we really tend to notice the energy is amplified around that time. And so we've got this Mercury stationing direct, which is great on the one hand because it actually has been a bit of a doozy of a Mercury retrograde for a lot of people. Mercury in its home sign of Gemini, right? True to form, as I've said, but now we're able to gradually gain some momentum in the Gemini area of our chart in particular, and in relation to those Mercury themes. And so we've got the opportunity now to say, okay, I've reflected, I've reviewed, I've rethought, I've reimagined, I've remembered, I've released, I've oh my goodness, I've re-envisioned, redone, reviewed, renovated, whatever, a million words you can think of that this applies to. And now I can start to move forward with more clarity there, with the pieces in place that I need. And so that's what's happening as far as Mercury goes. And then, of course, we've just had the solstice, right? And on the same day as the solstice, which officially was Sunday the 20th, although many people kept saying it was the 21st, but the actual ingress of the sun into Cancer, well, my time was Sunday night, so the 20th. So when the sun hit 0 degrees of Cancer. And on that same day, Jupiter stationed retrograde. So it's like Mercury and Jupiter changed modes of operating. And Jupiter, among other things, deals with, our sort of bigger picture thinking and our philosophies about things, the big ideas and ideals and that sort of thing. And so as Jupiter is stationing retrograde, we have more of an internalizing of those things. and we may be reflecting on those bigger picture ideas that we have, or, the bigger picture in general. We may be reflecting on things like growth and, wisdom and that sort of things, those Jupiter significations. And so, and that's in contrast to what's happening with Mercury, where Mercury, as it was retrograde, we're all of the fine tuning work is sort of happening behind the scenes, or internally. We're prompted at Mercury retrograde to slow down and take care of the details. And now that we've got all those ticky boxes checked off, and we've taken care of those details of whatever it is that we needed to do or reconsider or whatever, now we can take that intel, that information, and externalize it, right? Move forward with it and say, okay, now I have what I need, or now I've done what I needed to do to move on to the next thing, to bring this forward in some way. So that's what's going on. We also have the day that this video is released, on Wednesday the 23rd, Venus in Cancer opposing Pluto in Capricorn. So, and that's at 26 degrees respectively of Cancer and Capricorn. And the interesting thing is this Capricorn Cancer axis is what the full moon is triggering, right? And so Venus is hitting there like just before the full moon, kind of tuning us in, perhaps, right, to that energy. And Venus is following on Mars's heels. Mars opposed Pluto on June 5th. So if you think back to around then, what was going on that Cancer-Capricorn axis, that Mars may have inflamed in some way, or really brought a sense of like activity or action, or drive or intensity, in the sense, not in a like intensity meaning like perhaps assertiveness or even aggression in some way, right? Some kind of warrior-like energy. And now Venus is traveling over that same spot and going to have this conversation, right? This back and forth, because it's an opposition. This need, this kind of like a push-pull, a need for balancing things there with Pluto. And so Venus, Mars may have sort of inflamed things a little, and then Venus goes past and maybe tries to smooth things over a little, but it can still be, there can still be a sense of like power struggles when we're talking about Pluto, or things coming, from the depths, so to speak. And so that's what's happening there. And, so we've got that bit of, perhaps intensity. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's something like that's going to happen specifically individually for all of us. We may actually see that more on a larger, like a scale. It's something that goes on in the world, like a news story or something like that, that involves maybe, Venusian themes, something having to do with women, something having to do with resources, beauty, art, relationship, those Venus significators. And then, and it may be quite powerful in some way, or it may kind of expose, the underbelly in some way, or there may be some kind of power struggle involved because of the Pluto piece, right? So, but on the same day, we've got the sun in Cancer, because it's now Cancer season, right? And I wrote a little bit about that on Facebook yesterday, so you can check that out if you want. The link to that is always below. I mean, the link to Facebook, Instagram, if you want to check me out over there. The link to what's soon to be my new website, astrologymaven.com, will always be below as well. And I'll just pause briefly here to tell you that you can head over there And like right now, even though the site's not officially launched yet, and you can go to astrologymaven.com and you'll see a little pop-up that offers you my free guide to working with the moon. You just put in your first name and your email, and you'll get that download, and you'll get on my mailing list so that you know what's coming down the pipeline. And there are things coming down the pipeline as the website launches, and beyond kind of thing. So even if you were on my old mailing list, if you haven't signed up for the new one yet, you won't get the emails. So it's a totally different website, totally different email address. And so you can do that, right? Over at astrologymaven.com. All right. So I wrote about Cancer season briefly on Facebook is where I started with that, right? So if you wanted to check that out, you could. But so the sun is now in Cancer, and it is making a trine to Jupiter in Pisces. So a trine is a conversation of support, of ease, of flow. It's like upliftment, right? And so this, even though there may be some other intense things going on, can kind of, motivate us, the sun, towards more joy, more optimism, more a sense of growth, the search for truth, even when we're talking about Jupiter. And this is essentially happening right at the same time as the full moon. So I'm going to talk about that piece in more detail as we get closer to talking about the full moon shortly. A couple other things I want to mention to you. First off, we can't forget about the Saturn-Uranus square, right? And I don't think I've mentioned that yet in this take 3. I don't think I have. I did in the other takes, but I don't think I've brought it up here yet. So, we can't forget about that because it's not going away. It's just not going away. It is in some ways waxing and waning in intensity. Like we just had the second exact square between Saturn and Uranus, which I talked about last week. I'll link to that video below, and the first video I did on the subject. So you can get a sense of what this is about, and very much on an individual level as well, right? Because I speak to where that's happening in everybody's chart based on signs. So, but it's important to just remember that's going on, because even though Saturn and Uranus, right? Saturn and Aquarius, Uranus and Taurus are now separating a little bit. That conversation is going to be triggered by all the planets that are moving through Leo, another fixed sign, which opposes Saturn and squares Uranus. And so I spoke a little bit about this last week, right? And so we've got Mars in Leo right now, and then we're going to have, who's following next? Venus, close on the heels of Mars. And so Venus will then trigger that conversation, and then we're going to have the sun move in there, and then Mercury's going to move in there. So everybody's going to have their turn to have this interaction with Saturn and Uranus. So it's really indicative of the fact that this is the overarching theme, right? Like essentially every planet's having their say. It's like we cannot go far before encountering that core factor, right? And on a grander scale, like when we're talking about collectively speaking, right? And it is just in a very, very general sense, Saturn Uranus is this tension between the old and the new, between tradition and innovation. And I've spoken a lot about that in the past, including in last week's video. So on my question, like I titled last week's video, can we have it both ways? And ideally, it's kind of like, that's what's being asked of us, right? How do we work? Like when you have a square, and speaking with, from somebody who has enough squares in their birth chart, that like when you have that that tension, you have to do something to resolve the tension. And the idea is to try and work with those energies that are in tension and try to come up with a way to kind of make it so that, you know, you can somehow kind of do both. So that's what's going on with the Saturn-Uranus square. And so it's like, I'm bringing the Leo piece into it, right? When all of these planets are now hitting Leo and opposing Saturn and squaring Uranus. And then, of course, the moon is in there too, because anytime the moon hits a fixed sign, fixed signs are Aquarius, Leo, Taurus, and Scorpio. Then, and that happens 4 times a month for a couple days at a time, right? So, like I was saying in last week's video, when the moon hits Scorpio, it's like literally being pulled in 4 directions at once. But even when the moon hits, comes into a conjunction with Saturn and Aquarius every month, and then Uranus and Taurus every month, and then hits, Leo. And during the time when all those other planets are in Leo, pings off all those planets, going to activate that. So there's just like this constant activation of the Saturn-Uranus square. And what I started to say was this time of the planets moving through Leo and activating that, from that point, it's kind of like I feel like in some ways it gets a little more personal in the sense that, Leo is about, well, what about me in a sense? There's Aries has some of that going on too, but it's in a different way, right? Leo is like, wants to be recognized and is very good at recognizing others and at making others feel special, but really craves that in return, right? And so, there's a personalizing element to that, I feel like, and it's like, it may trigger this kind of, how can I make this work for me sort of thing. And what I want, right? Mars and Uranus moving through there and kind of highlighting like what we are both, what we both attract to us, sort of Venus, and what we desire, Mars. So I wanted to mention that to you because, like I said, we're just like, that's just not going anywhere. And so, and for each of us, I started to say that's playing out collectively, of course, but then we've all got Aquarius and we've all got Taurus and we've all got Leo and we've all got Scorpio somewhere in our chart, right? And so these houses where the fixed sign sits, and particularly if you're somebody that has a lot of fixed energy in your chart, if you're somebody that has one of the fixed signs as your ascendant, or, you've even got like your sun in there, your moon in there, or various planets, then this is more personal for you. And you may be really feeling the intensity of this. But for each of us, it's that the houses where Aquarius and Taurus sit that are the crux of the story, right? So, and I spoke about that last week. So you can, if you don't know where that's hitting and the themes that's triggering in your own life, then if you go listen to the video, then I talk about that and get into the specifics. Okay, so the other couple of things I wanted to mention before diving deeper into the full moon are that we've got on Friday, Neptune's stationing retrograde, so another planet, right, changing direction. And that's happening at 23 degrees Pisces. And then in December, it will station direct at 20 degrees Pisces. So just moving like a few degrees. But if you're somebody that's got, again, planets around that area of the chart, then you're more likely to feel this more personally. You know, year before last, and even part of last year, I went through a Neptune transit because I have my sun at 17 Pisces. And so Neptune was sitting right there. And I can tell you from experience that it was a bit of a trying, you know, like it was a trying time in many ways. And there was those typical Neptunian significations, right? Like where there was this whole notion of seeing things sometimes through rose-colored glasses, and sometimes the rose-colored glasses, you know, being abruptly taken off, and so that sense of and a real sense of like there was a lot of tiredness and feeling really like in some ways directionless. Like even if I had intentions and I knew what I wanted to do, making it happen felt like swimming through pea soup kind of thing. And so if you're going through that, I feel for you. Know that this too shall pass though, right? And what a Neptune transit can be really good for is, first of all, surrendering to that, and knowing that it will pass and seeing where it takes you. And also, you know, really connecting more on a you know, spiritual sense, and with things like creativity and art and, you know, that sort of thing, music. So it can be really good for that. All right. So that's what's happening with Neptune. Neptune stations retrograde every year for a significant chunk of time, right? So that in and of itself is nothing new per se. But I've spoken about the fact that, you know, it's in a sign that it has a resonance with in Pisces, and Jupiter is also in Pisces right now. And so we're kind of getting the a double hit there. And so, okay, I'm going to leave that. And then the last thing I want to mention to you before we really dive into the full moon, and there's my heat kicking on again, is Venus. Venus moving into Leo. So Venus is changing signs, moving out of Cancer and into Leo on Sunday, the 27th, and will follow on the heels of Mars, like I said. So, and we'll eventually meet up with Mars later in the summer. I can't remember the date, but you know, Venus, our sense of love, pleasure, relationship, connected to our resources, the idea of beauty and aesthetic, moving into Leo, who, you know, is big-hearted and generous, and Venus in Leo is affectionate. Venus in Leo likes to show their love, but also likes to receive it, right? Be on the receiving end of that, like I was mentioning. You know, Venus in Leo is like, go big or go home. Venus in Leo likes the bling, you know, this kind of thing. So, you know, and Venus in Leo is playful as well. So that's nice, but it is, you know, somewhat tempered by playing a role in that Saturn Uranus story, like I was mentioning to you, somehow involved there. All right, so that's enough of all those pieces. Let's dive into the Capricorn full moon now. I'm just going to quickly show you the chart. I want to show you here at the top of the chart, you can see the moon in Capricorn, right up there at 3 degrees. And then down here, you can see the sun at 3 degrees Cancer. So opposite the sky, like at all full moons, the sun and the moon are opposite each other. And then we've got Jupiter playing a role, like I was mentioning. Jupiter here in Pisces at 2 degrees, right? Making a sextile to the moon and a trine to the sun. And then, you know, the other pieces I spoke about, I'm not going to belabor any of that. But one of the things I did want to point out to you, This is asteroid Juno, who is conjunct the South Node right now and is kind of highlighting some things that I want to bring up today. So having some helpful conversations that I think it's worth mentioning, because I think we can use all the help we can get right now. And so I don't often talk about the asteroids these days. There was a time when I spent more time on that, but I've really tried to kind of distill things down and simplify for my sake and yours. And as I had been, and am studying more traditional astrology, but I do still, take a look at the asteroids, and I do find that they're relevant and significant, but sometimes it just complicates things. And so I will go back to that at some point, and maybe do it in a different way. But all that being said, when I was looking at things, I thought, okay, that's worth mentioning to me. It struck me, and so I thought that I would mention it to you, that piece with Juno there. But before I get there, just overall, okay, I'm going to give you an overall sense of this full moon in Capricorn. So it is, in some ways, a full moon that is practical and pragmatic, and serious, and perhaps achievement oriented, because it is Capricorn after all that we're talking about, right? So those typical Capricorn significations, but there's also something buoyant here, a cause perhaps for optimism or celebration in some way, and that's because of the interplay with Jupiter, and there's not a lot of other like tension or prickly stuff going on with this full moon. And it's the first full moon, first moon we've had outside of the eclipses, so that's good. And previous to the eclipses being in Gemini and Sagittarius, they were in Cancer and Capricorn. So we've got this. It might be the first Capricorn moon that wasn't involved in that eclipse situation, if I recall correctly, as well. And so there's that, right? It's kind of out of those intense waters. Like last year, we had so much going on in the cardinal signs, Capricorn, Cancer, Aries, and Libra, and now it's shifted more to the fixed signs. But so there's that piece of it, but it's also because Jupiter is involved here, and there's not a lot of other, there's not a lot of tension going on in relation. I mean, Saturn, Uranus aside here, right? In relation to this full moon specifically. So I'll give you a personal example. I have Capricorn in my 5th house, which among other things has to do with children, right? And my kids obviously are both finishing up the school year, which has been a hard road to travel down, as anyone who's been in this situation knows. If you've got kids, if you've been if you're a teacher, if you are involved in education in any way, shape, or form, and if you've been in school yourself during this time, like it's not been easy. And so we're at this point now where, graduations are happening and things are wrapping up. And so we can all kind of breathe a bit of a sigh of relief in general. But me personally, like I have Capricorn in my 5th house, as I was saying. And so I have, my daughter is graduating grade 8. And so, there is a sense of sort of achievement there. There's also a sense of like, a little bit of, stoicism in that, because she spent most of her grade 8 year doing online learning, which kind of sucks, because she's gone to the same school since kindergarten. And so she didn't really she only spent about 3 weeks in actual school. She went back and then our COVID numbers went a little crazy and the kids were all sent back home. And so they've been doing online learning ever since. And so, that's been difficult, and it's kind of been a hard pill to swallow, right? But also she, along with one of her very good friends, are valedictorians of their graduating class. And so that's cause for celebration. That's an achievement for sure. But at the same time, they don't get an in-person celebration. And so, it's kind of that, you see that, that mix of things, right, going on there. So, and we're going to talk about what house is this highlighting for each sign. So sit tight, we're going to get there. But in general, all full moons are about some kind of a culmination, something bearing fruit, something like an ending or a release, something that is reaching a turning point. The full moon can often bring up emotions from under the surface as the moon, illuminates things that are kind of going on in our internal waters, right? So all of those things can happen. And so whatever this is bringing up would have been something that, it may be related to the new moon, which was an eclipse in Gemini a couple of weeks ago. So whatever kind of happened then, whatever was initiated then. But then on a grander scale, it is related to the new moon in Capricorn that happened in January of this year. So January 12th, there was a new moon in Capricorn, which initiated this, this 6-month cycle, right? Where some things began there and now they're reaching this turning point or this culmination or this bearing fruit sort of phase. Before winding down, right? So if you can think about, January is a time when some people do resolutions, right? Capricorn new moon is a time to do that, right? To kind of consider what we want to achieve over the year. I don't do generally New Year's resolutions, but a lot of people do. And so that energy fits. But just, what got off the ground around then? And we'll dive a little bit deeper to that in a couple of minutes. But I want to point out the ruler of this full moon is Saturn. Saturn rules Capricorn. Saturn also rules Aquarius, which is where Saturn is right now, right? In that square to Uranus. And the thing I wanted to point out, I showed you Juno on the chart, asteroid Juno. And so what's happening here is that Juno is in a sextile to Saturn. And so it's so there's that piece of the puzzle here. And also Uranus, right, Juno is also in a trine to Chiron. So, and to a lesser degree in a trine to Mars. So sorry, my Mercury stationing is scrambling my wires right now. So that trine between Mars and Leo and Juno in Sagittarius will be exact in a little bit, but it's close enough. So my point is that there's something here, I feel like, to kind of just pay attention to, because in some ways, how I've been saying to you in past videos that despite everything else that's going on, Jupiter in Pisces has been this kind of like a lifeboat for us, right? It's been this like something to hang on to. And I feel like Juno is kind of trying to offer us that in her own way as well. Juno, if you don't know, in mythology, was considered the queen of the gods, right? So she was the wife of Jupiter or Zeus. And so in some ways, it's kind of like she's trying to help Jupiter out here. And she was also the mother of Mars, right? She's making a trine to Mars, which is a positive conversation, a conversation that is of the nature of Jupiter, actually. Trines are considered. And so, and trining Chiron, which is about healing, among other things, but in Aries, which is a Mars-ruled sign. And so I just kind of feel like Juno is there to kind of lend a helping hand, maybe in the background a little, but Juno symbolizes a committed union, loyalty and protection. Juno sticks it out through thick and thin, right? She was married to, like I said, Jupiter in the mythology, and Jupiter was a philanderer, and she raged at that, at his infidelity and his indiscretions, but she stayed in partnership with him. And, she sometimes took revenge on his consorts and things like that. But Demetra George, who has done a lot of work on the asteroids, she's sort of like the expert on the subject. She says that Juno fights for the rights of women and children, especially those disadvantaged or abused, that kind of thing. And so I feel like on some level, Juno is trying to kind of offer some support, in her own way, and in what may be otherwise trying times, right? So I just thought that I would mention that. And Juno's in Sagittarius right now. So wherever Sagittarius is in your chart, that's where Juno is transiting currently. All right. Let's talk more about the moon before I go through each sign, because I just want to say a little bit about the polarity between Cancer and Capricorn, because we've got the moon in Capricorn, sun in Cancer at the time of this full moon. This is the polarity of our inner and outer worlds kind of thing, right? The moon being that sort of emotionally sensitive, kind of nurturing energy, but Cancer, being the moon is ruled by or Cancer is ruled by the moon, sorry, and so there's that sense of inner world, and outer world, which is Capricorn. It's what we do in the outside world. It's our worldly ambitions. It's our achievements. It's our striving for sort of material security, rather than the more sort of emotional security that Cancer ultimately craves, right? So our home and our place out in the world, it's this axis. It's also, like, I think of it as the axis of parenting in many ways. Cancer is the great mother, and Capricorn in some ways is this like a more of a authoritarian father figure, even though Capricorn is a feminine sign. Lots of people forget that. But it's kind of like to have ultimately, I think to be a balanced parent. Like, even if, and I don't pretend to really know anything about this, because I've never been a single parent, and oh my gosh, praise to you all. But like, ultimately, like, even if you're a single parent, you have to play both roles, right? And so it's the balance of those two energies that sort of like, the nurturer, and the one who makes the rules, and sets the boundaries. Capricorn is ruled by Saturn. That kind of idea. So, and these two signs signify the solstice points when the light literally pivots, right? Cancer is the womb. And Capricorn is the heights, or the sort of, the heights we have the potential to reach as we kind of move through this physical existence, right? Cancer is a cardinal water sign, like I mentioned, and it is ruled by the moon. And it is associated with, like, as a cardinal sign, it initiates. As a water sign, it has to do with our emotion and our sensitivity, that kind of thing. It is symbolized by the crab. The crab is like the protector, right? It's associated with the concept of protection on a number of levels. Like, crabs generally hold their houses on their back, right? There's always a sense of home wherever they go. And they can retreat into that at a moment's notice, sort of thing. And there's that protective outer shell, but they're soft on the inside, right? And it's very much, there's this association with our emotional tides, Cancer being ruled by the moon. Also, this idea of the waters of remembrance, right? Cancer is very connected to the concept of memory, to things like family lineage and history and legacy. Cancer, Sun in Cancer is very motivated by comfort and nurturing and a sense of belonging to like tribe or family. Can be very much a homebody. Life revolves, around sort of the home front, around family, around roots, around, again, tribe, around emotional attachments, potentially around mothering, that kind of thing. And then Capricorn, opposite Cancer, is, like I said, a feminine sign, but it's also a cardinal sign, and it's ruled by Saturn. And so, whereas Cancer is about like initiating emotional sort of experiences, that's the impulse it runs on, so to speak. Capricorn is about the more material initiation of things. Capricorn is the sign of the sea goat. And not just the mountain goat. I see people, like, I even get emails from professional astrologers who say Capricorn is the mountain goat. Capricorn is not the mountain goat. Capricorn is the sea goat. And so, it's the body of a goat and the tail of a fish. And this speaks to that, that's the feminine side, I would say. It's like this idea that although there is a sense of ambition, and practicality and stoicism and being pragmatic and persistent, right? The goat that climbs the mountain and determined to get where it's going. Capricorn also knows that the origins of anything worth achieving begin in those primordial kind of waters of creation, right? So it's a nod to Cancer, like to Cancer as the womb of creation, and to that which feels like home. So Capricorn reaches deep into those waters to achieve sort of the ultimate pinnacle at its best, right? And of course, there's a downside, like there is to every sign. And sometimes I think the downside to Capricorn is there can be this sense of just like losing the tail, in the sense that it's like there's this drive to just keep climbing the mountain for the sake of it, and going after the next shiny thing, or trying to get to the top, but forgetting the origin of things, or forgetting that sense of like creative place that it came from, or drawing on that creativity, right? Or that sort of sense of like the emotional sort of piece, the emotional depths. And so then there can be this kind of like ruthless determination to get to the top just for the sake of it, sort of thing. So anyway, so just to say a little bit more about that axis, like this can trigger themes around like the balance of work and home life, for example, which a lot of folks have been struggling with, no doubt, over COVID, right? Or the pragmatic and the emotional. Material security versus emotional safety and security. Parenting in some way, right? Whether that be like your own sort of inner sense of parenting, or like reparenting yourself, or in a more literal, practical sense. Legacy, right? Your ancestral kind of lineage, which is very connected to Cancer, and then the ambitions you have for leaving your own legacy, which is Capricorn. So those are the energies overall that are being triggered, highlighted at this full moon. So I have a few questions for you, which I often do, if it's relevant. So I've figured that I would give you a few questions to just contemplate as you're experiencing this full moon. And unlike the last couple of moons we've had, where those moons were eclipses, which are not the ideal times to do any kind of like, personal kind of ritual around, we can get back to those practices if that's something that you do. And full moons are generally times for considering like what's no longer serving you in that area of life, and in relation to maybe those Capricorn themes, and like, what you want to release. And that can be quite literally, or it can be like emotional baggage and that kind of stuff as well. Ideologies, what have you, right? So things that you want to let go of, release, you're done with them, kind of thing. So you can do a little ritual there, and it can be very simple. It could be just something that you think about, or you can do something where you write it down, or you want to take it a step further and you write it down and you burn it up, or you release it, you bury it in the ground. You might have heard me mention these things before. So sorry, I have thoughts bubbling up that I may or may not share here as we go forward. But first, the questions. Think about what is culminating now that began back in January, right? Or maybe to a lesser degree, or in some way, shape, or form, a couple of weeks ago at that eclipse, what was set in motion then. And now, so reflect on that. And then consider, what am I ready to release? What is no longer serving me? Maybe what am I being even like in some way, like my hand is being forced to let go of this, and how can I do that with some kind of grace, right? And some kind of sense of, maybe because we're talking about Capricorn here, some sense of pragmatism, or stoicism, or practicality in some way, but not ruthlessness. Okay. So, but what are you ready to release, and what's no longer serving you, particularly as it relates to that Capricorn area of your chart and those themes, which we're going to get to shortly. Another question you might consider is, how can I move to the next level regarding these themes, right? Like, where am I at now? Like, what do I want to see happen in the future in relation to this Capricorn area? And what do I need to kind of start wrapping up now in order to do that? And that may take, it may take a couple of weeks on a smaller scale till we get to the next new moon, or it may take the rest of the year, like to the next 6 months kind of thing, to wind things down before you can begin a new cycle at the next new moon in Capricorn, right? Okay, next, how can Jupiter in Pisces, the life raft, right, I keep talking about, help me with that in some way? Where is it pointing perhaps to cause for celebration that I don't want to lose sight of, even if it's only small wins, small celebrations, a small light at the end of the tunnel, something to hang on to, like I was saying last week and earlier in this video, that can get me through, trying times. Even if everything's not perfect and there is still work to do, where is the bright spot? And then, a couple of questions you may contemplate is, how is my work-home life balance? And do I need to recalibrate there and restore some balance? And then also speaking to balance, right? Because full moons are oppositions. And full moons often bring up issues around relating. It's the sun and the moon, right? The sort of more that notion of like divine masculine and feminine. How is the balance in my relationships, right? And what is there? Do I need to restore some balance there as well? Okay, so we're going to take it through the signs, and I am speaking first and foremost to rising sign. So if you know your rising sign, that's what I suggest you listen to first. And, because that generally is the most accurate, obvious, literal, if you will. And especially when we're talking about these general horoscopes, right? Like, I'm not looking at your specific chart, but in whole sign houses, which is what I'm using, if you are a Virgo rising like me, then I know that you have Capricorn in the 5th house, for example. I don't know where your sun is placed or your moon is placed or what have you, but that much we can know. And so when we're doing a general forecast like this, ascendant is the thing that tends to hit home most, depending on what else is happening in your chart. But you can also definitely listen for your sun and your moon signs, because those will also be, relevant and bring you added kind of layers to the story. And I want to say to you that people that have placements around 3 degrees of Capricorn or the other cardinal signs, Cancer, Libra, and Aries, are likely to feel this on a more personal level. And that's give or take, like the beginning of the cardinal signs to about 5-6 degrees kind of thing. You will feel this a little bit more intensely, because the moon will be interacting with those planets by a more tense aspect, like a square or an opposition or conjunction. And then if you have placements around 2-3 degrees of Pisces, then you're going to have Scorpio hitting that by trine, or Virgo and Taurus hitting that by sextile. And so that may be more of an experience of support, or just things being a little bit more pleasant on some level. But all things being equal, we do have Venus opposing Pluto and the Saturn-Uranus square, so that's also something to just be mindful of. So I'm just looking at the chart, and I'm just like, I feel like there's something else that I want to say to you, and maybe it's just Mercury stationing direct as I'm recording this. Potentially, it could be that. Oh, I know. Okay, so I grabbed this book off my shelf earlier, and I've read from this before a couple times. This is The 12 Faces of the Goddess by Danielle Blackwood. Anyway, and so in here, I sometimes like the way that she describes the signs. And I just want to read you a little piece here about Capricorn, okay? Capricorn is about defining life purpose by pruning away the excess of the sign that precedes it, right? Sagittarius can be about excess, and committing to the long view. And it's funny because this morning, here's my little sidebar, when I was up early, because it was freezing. And as I was mentioning, I think, so like I grabbed a book off the shelf that I hadn't looked at for a long time. And for some reason, I don't know why, I just sometimes get this urge to grab and open and see what the message is, which technically is called bibliomancy. But so I grabbed this book off the shelf called In Praise of Slow. I believe that's the one it was. And it is by a guy named Carl Honore. I don't know how you pronounce it. He's actually Canadian, as I recall. And this is a book that was published a while back, but generally, he writes about the need to slow down, right? So anyway, you can look that up yourself if you're interested. He's written a couple of books. And so there was nothing particularly, when I opened the book and was flipping through that struck me, but it was just that whole notion. And I thought, that's one of the things I hadn't said to you before, that Capricorn's in it for the long game. Capricorn has a relationship to time being ruled by Saturn. That is, in some ways, I think quite unique, because Capricorn knows that true achievement, takes integrity, and it's not an overnight flash in the pan thing, right? Slow and steady. It's like we have to take one step at a time. We have to not rush things, and it's interesting because at the same time, Capricorn gets a lot done. So it's like there's time for everything if you just keep at it, kind of thing, right? That's Capricorn. So yeah, I want to read this to you now before going through the signs. So the process of defining entails the recognition of boundaries and limitations, which crystallizes an objective, right? Capricorn knows you can't have it all, you can't do it all, you can't be it all. We have to focus on things, on certain things. Capricorn is ruled by Saturn, the planetary archetype that is traditionally associated with boundaries. Before telescopes, Saturn was the farthest planet visible to the naked eye, and therefore came to be identified with boundaries, limitations, and endings. Consequently, Saturn is also related to the limits and structures of our physical reality, skin, hair, and bones as well. Starting most noticeably with the Saturn return, right, which we all go through around age 29-ish. That's our first Saturn return. And the major Saturn cycles in our lives coincide with rites of passage that lead to new levels of maturity. Therefore, Saturn is aligned with aging, milestones, and taking on the mantle of responsibility. Saturn is also associated with the concept of time, just as I was saying. His older Greek equivalent was the god Kronos, who was the personification of time itself. In Jungian parlance, Capricorn is connected to the archetype of the senex, the wise old man or the elder, which also exemplifies the archetype of the crone. I love this part. The Cailleach, the old woman of winter from the Gaelic lands, as well as Hecate or Hecate, however you want to pronounce it, crone goddess of the crossroads, especially relate to Capricorn. Deeply resonating with the wisdom of the grandmothers, passed down traditions, and time-honored ways of knowing. There's that nod to Cancer, right? The nod to the ancestors, the tail in the water of the sea goat that I was talking about. Deeply resonating with the wisdom of the grandmothers. I said that already. Capricorn represents our psychic ancestral bones. Although the Capricorn archetype is aligned with the father, like I mentioned, and the animus, it is actually a yin sign, and is therefore conjointly an expression of the sacred feminine. With Capricorn, I am reminded of the symbolism of the hieros gamos, or sacred marriage between the polarities of masculine and feminine. So there you have it. I wanted to read that to you. Okay, so let's take it through the signs. I hope this is not too all over the place for you, because I do feel, like I said, like Mercury direct is kind of short-circuiting my wires today. So apologies for that. But we will take it through the signs, and considering all that I've already said, and we will look to where this full moon is culminating for you and what themes it is triggering for you, based on your rising sign, like I said, first and foremost, right? So we're going to begin with Capricorn, because this is your full moon, Capricorn. And, you know, one of the things I didn't say, actually, this, I think, is what I was searching for that was in the archives there. So speaking to everybody, not just Capricorn, I'll get to Capricorn, just give me one sec. I just wanted to mention that throughout, you know, 2020, we had a lot of Capricorn energy going on, a lot of energy there with, like, Pluto's still there, right? Taking care of business. But Saturn and Jupiter were in Capricorn before they moved into Aquarius and made that conjunction at the beginning of this year. But Saturn and Jupiter and Pluto were doing some deep, deep, heavy work in the Capricorn area of our chart. And so we may, at this full moon in general, we may have a bit of an emotional release that is connected ultimately to that, right? Like, I mean, 2020, oh my gosh, like, it was not easy. And here we are in 2021, which is, you know, we're a little older and a little wiser, but we're still going through it. But the Capricorn piece, like, it was really heavy, and there was some big energy going on there. And so we may be at this point where there may be like some release that is directly connected to that story, right? Okay, so that's what I wanted to say. So now we're going to start with Capricorn, and we are going to talk about this full moon in your first house, because that's where it is. So this full moon is playing out on the axis of relationship for you, ultimately, right? The moon in your first house, the sun across the sky in your seventh house of the other. So the full moon is illuminating the house of self, of you, of your physical body and vitality, you know, which can have to do with health. Like, sixth house is very much health as well, but first house can very much be related to our physical health and our physical body, our appearance, you know, our vitality, which I mentioned. It's also, your first house is like, you know, how you kind of announce yourself to the world when you're born. Like, it's like how you come into the world, right? It's the sign that was rising in the east when you were born. And so there's this sense of how you present to the world, in a sense, right? How you come at the world, so to speak. And so this first house full moon is illuminating something. It's a culmination point. It may be bearing fruit in some way, or a turning point in some way, or a need for releasing in some way. Things revolving around those first house themes that I just mentioned to you, right? And it can be like highlighting, quite literally, relationship to self and others, and the need for some balance there, perhaps. But it can also be where, on a smaller scale, maybe something that was kind of initiated back around the eclipse in Gemini a couple of weeks ago can be reaching the next level or culminating in some way. But also very much about, think about what was initiated for you back in January, around the time of the new moon on June 12th, which was, your new moon in Capricorn, which happened in that first house, obviously, Capricorn rising. And what's going on with that now, right? What's, like, maybe this is something like a physical kind of health issue that was initiated, or something about it was initiated back in January. So now it's reaching this culmination or turning point, or a shift in some way. Emotional release may be happening. It's potentially like maybe work you've been doing on yourself, right, is reaching this culmination point and bearing fruit at this point. Or something about how you relate to the external world. Like I said, how you kind of come at the world, that, some new way of doing that, or something that transpired or got off the ground around January is now leveling up, or reaching the next point, or reaching this point where, it's coming to the precipice, sort of thing. So that is ultimately what's happening for you, Capricorn. And, like I was saying in the intro, the really nice help from Jupiter can be cause for optimism here, right? Can even if it's just like, I don't want to celebrate too much, but like celebrate the small wins. There can be a cause for optimism in some way. And so allow your stoic self to experience that, and to, like, even if it's just a small passing thing, but, if there's cause for celebration, or for some optimism, or some growth in some way, then allow it, right? Allow yourself to hang on to that and to enjoy that. Okay. We're going to move on to Sagittarius now. Sag, for you, this full moon is culminating in your second house of your personal resources, your money, your time, your energy, what you value, your sense of self-worth. And, so this is related to potentially something that transpired back in January, or something that began back in January, that speaks to these second house themes. And now it's reaching a culmination point. Now it's bearing fruit, potentially. Now it's a turning point in some way. Or maybe an emotional release around these themes of personal finances, or how you use your resources and how you get your basic needs met. So this can be things like, maybe you started a savings account back in January, and it's starting to, you're starting to see the fruits of your labor there. Maybe you took on a new way to bring in some extra cash, and it's next level now, or maybe you've realized, oh, this isn't working for me, or this is taking up too much of my time and energy, and you're releasing that, or something that's been costing you potentially a lot of money. You're releasing, right? Something maybe that began around September, or something that transpired a couple weeks ago, even at the new moon eclipse in Gemini. But this can be like how you make your money can be changing right now. It can be, again, like it can either be like things are bearing fruit, or it can be a time to release, right? As far as those second house themes go. And I also want to remind you, Sagittarius, that Jupiter, your ruling planet, is supporting this moon, because it is in trine with the sun in Cancer, right? And it is in sextile with the moon in Capricorn. And so that's lending, it's putting a little bit of like wind beneath the wings, if you will, to this full moon. And so even if things are hard work, like for example, maybe you're realizing like something that you're doing, maybe it's even a side gig that you started to make extra cash, is like there's still a lot of work to do, but there is still cause for maybe some celebration, right? Or maybe there's an area of life that Jupiter is throwing you a life raft, and just giving you a sense of hopefulness there. So I think that's good. Sagittarius, I'm going to leave that there. I'm going to move on to Scorpio. And Scorpio, for you, this full moon is illuminating your third house. So this has to do with your immediate environment. And so it's like, kind of what's in your sphere on the day to day. And this can be things like where you commute, on the day to day, or short little trips that you take, short distance travel. This can speak to things like, or people like your peers, your siblings, your cousins, your, friends that feel like family, your, teammates, that sort of thing. And it can also speak to themes around communication, and, your daily interactions, your sense of, things that have to do with, marketing, if that applies to you, or commerce in some way, right? It can sometimes be about vehicles and technology in the third house. The third house is home to Gemini, ruled by Mercury, right? And so there's these mercurial themes kind of thing that go on in relation to the third house. And so those are the things that can be triggered for you at the time of this full moon, that can be illuminated, that can be reaching a point where there's a need for release, for letting go, or things could be bearing fruit, right? And those things are in direct relation to potentially something that transpired a couple of weeks ago at the eclipse in Gemini, or more, perhaps more obviously, and in a bigger sense, something that got off the ground, that transpired, that was initiated around the new moon in Capricorn, which is January 12th of this year. Sorry, I just noticed that the battery's low on the camera, so I'm hoping it doesn't cut off. That would be Mercury direct, right? So this culmination of sorts is happening regarding those third house themes. And so for you very specifically, like to get practical, that might be things like something relating to your siblings or your cousins, or like I said, people like friends who feel like family, or teammates or something like that, right? Peers in some way, something that began in relation to those people is now reaching a turning point or a release, or maybe like an emotional event in relation to those people is transpiring too. That's bringing up some emotions, right? Or a trip that is the culmination of something, like a short jaunt or somewhere that you drive kind of thing, is bringing up the culmination of something that was set in motion back in January, or initiated back in January, or somehow is connected to the new moon in Capricorn from January of this year. Could be like let's take it in a completely different direction. It could be like some kind of like a marketing campaign, if that pertains to you, and a business or something that you own. A marketing campaign that you've worked on is now culminating, right? It could have to do with, or teaching and learning is very much third house. So something initiated back in January, I'm thinking of education now, and what I was talking about earlier in the video, where, it's wrapping up, the school year's wrapping up around here. So it may be that, something that began back at the beginning of this year, and now we're reaching this point of release, culmination, bearing fruit, turning point, right? So that is where I'm going to leave that, Scorpio. And I'm going to move on to Libra now, because I really don't want the camera battery to die before I finish. And so Libra, for you, this is a full moon that is illuminating your fourth house of home, family, roots, ancestry, emotional security, place of living, these kinds of things. So this is related to something that maybe was initiated or transpired a couple of weeks ago at the Gemini new moon eclipse, but more likely something that, grabbed your attention or got off the ground or was initiated back in January of this year, when the new moon in Capricorn is now reaching a culmination point, right? Or it's bearing fruit in some way, or it's reaching a point where maybe it's like stirring up some emotions, and there's some baggage that needs to be let go of. Or there's just some kind of a natural conclusion being reached even, or something being like coming into your awareness. So being illuminated, like I said. And so this can be like, I don't know, maybe there were plans to move back in January, and now that's happening. You're leaving one place and moving to another. When we're talking about the fourth house, can involve real estate, in the exchange of real estate in some way. It can involve, or something revolving around that sense of like place of living or home. This could be something happening in the family unit that transpired, or initiated around January, and is now coming to a natural conclusion, or reaching next level, or coming to a place of release or closure, or that kind of thing. Those are really the most obvious likely scenarios, Libra. And there may be some tension between like work-life balance, because this is opposite, your 10th house of career and ambition and such, where you've got the sun in Cancer right now. So there could be this tension and this balance, needing for balance going on between those two areas of the chart, excuse me. Okay, so we're going to move to Virgo now. Virgo, for you, this full moon is culminating in your fifth house. It's illuminating your fifth house. Like I was saying to you, I'm a Virgo rising, so this is my experience as well. And I gave you an example earlier, but this has to do with children, or things surrounding children, like pregnancy, childbirth. It can have to do with your sense of pleasure, like how you have fun in life, what sparks joy for you. Sometimes it speaks to hobbies and sports and things we do for fun. And, our creative kind of pursuits. So for you, this is what's reaching this turning point, this release point, this bearing fruit point, this point where maybe some emotions are stirred up in relation to these fifth house themes that need to be kind of let go of, or released in some way. And ultimately, you've got, Jupiter is supporting this moon. And so there may be some, like I was saying, some cause for optimism or some even a small reason to celebrate, right? Some silver lining in some regard. So that's nice. So yeah, you may, like me, have kids that are graduating, or you may be coming, you may have a creative project that you started back in January, when we had the new moon in Capricorn that is now leveling up, or it's bearing fruit, or it's reaching a natural conclusion or something like that. Or your relationship to joy may have, something may have been initiated in January, and now that is culminating in some way or bearing fruit in some way, right, to pleasure. And it may be related to the new moon eclipse a couple of weeks ago, right, because we're at the full moon point of the monthly cycle as well. So, but it's the fifth house ultimately that's triggered for you. And then you've got across the sky your 11th house of the group of friends, of alliances and that kind of thing. That's kind of, in a balancing act with this fifth house. Okay, so I'm going to leave that for you, Virgo. Crossing my fingers the camera doesn't run out, and I'm going to move on to Leo now, where we have the full moon illuminating your sixth house, Leo. And so this is the house that speaks to health and illness, your daily routine. Sorry, I have a hair in my eye. Your daily routine, your sense of service, labor, like the daily toil kind of thing. Your work that you do on the day-to-day. And that could be like a paid gig or just work that you do that's unpaid as well. It's your sense of service. Like I said, health issues. And sometimes this can speak to pets as well. So for you, Leo, this is what's being coming to this culmination point, this time of potentially something's bearing fruit here, something that was initiated back in January or kind of got off the ground there. Some seeds that were planted back in January are now bearing fruit, right? And reaching a turning point in some way, or something's being illuminated around those sixth house themes. It could be related to the new moon eclipse a couple of weeks ago as well, but it's in the same theme family sort of thing as the new moon that happened in January of this year. So it's directly related to that. And there may be like even some like emotional release coming up around these six house themes for you around this time. And so maybe like a work project that you started back in January around that time is now reaching a turning point or a natural conclusion, or it's culminating or bearing fruit in some way, or it's some kind of health issue or something was initiated regarding your health that may be coming to this point, right? This full moon point as well. Okay, that's for you, Leo. I'm going to move on to Cancer now. And I'm going to speak to the seventh house, because this is where this full moon is happening for you, Cancer. It's illuminating your seventh house of one-to-one relationships, of close personal relationships. This can be like significant other, but it can be close friends, family members. It can be around the idea of contracts and agreements as well. And so something that transpired likely back in January that was initiated in some way with regards to your relationships or contracts and agreements is now reaching this point of bearing fruit, of culmination, of something being illuminated, of a need for release in some way, of emotional kind of stuff bubbling up around the topic, whatever this is for you. So maybe a new relationship was initiated back then, and now it's leveling up, or it's being released, or maybe a contract, like a short-term contract that was initiated back around January is now coming to a conclusion or reaching a turning point, or maybe your partner, right? Seventh house can speak to what's going on with like the other people in our life, oftentimes our partner. And so maybe it's like there's something going on with your partner that was initiated back in January that is now coming to that full moon illumination point, right? Culminating in some way. So those are the themes that are being highlighted for you for this full moon. And definitely listen to everything I said in the introduction, which was a lot. And I'm going to move on to Gemini now. Gemini, for you, the 8th house is being triggered by this full moon. And it is speaking to themes of other people's resources. So it can be other people's money that comes to you through other people, or things like taxes, insurance, debt, wills, inheritance, loans, bursaries, mortgages, all of those things. It can be your intimate connections with other people, your entanglements with other people, your psychological kind of depth as well, our 8th house, right? This cycle of death and rebirth. So Gemini, for you, there is something culminating now that was likely triggered back in January initially, or was initiated, or the seeds were planted, right? Back in January at the new moon in Capricorn. Maybe even there may have been something a couple of weeks ago at the Gemini eclipse that was instigated too. But we're reaching this point now in the cycle where there's a natural conclusion being reached. There is a culmination, right? All of those full moon words that we use. And so in a practical sense, this could be like, there could have been something initiated in terms of taxes, in terms of something going on with like an inheritance, or something going on with some kind of like debt or something like that, that is now reaching the next point. Or it may be like, ideally it's like, well, maybe you started paying off debt, for example, back in January, and now it's like there's a letting go of that now, of that burden in some way. Or there could be, like, to take it in a different direction, there could be like some kind of tax issue that was initiated, and now it's reaching this point of illumination or release, or it's bringing up like something that's transpiring in this 8th house could be bringing up some deep raw emotion, at the time of a full moon that's needing to be released, right? So that you can kind of move on from there. So yeah, I think that gives you things to go on. This is definitely oftentimes when we're looking at like practical, literal translations, the 8th house oftentimes has to do with our kind of, our entanglements with other people that involve money in some way. Sometimes other resources like time and energy as well. And then there's some other themes there that I mentioned, but that's for you, Gemini. We're going to move to Taurus now, and I'm hanging on tight to the fact that we're not going to lose the camera because the battery's low. But Taurus, for you, I am speaking to the 9th house because this is where the full moon is culminating for you. And so something got off the ground back in January at the new moon in Capricorn, and it related to themes of higher learning, of your philosophy and your worldview, potentially having to do with like foreign people and places, or foreign travel, or sometimes armchair travel, right? Like the things we learn just from watching documentaries and reading books and taking courses and that kind of thing. So or like this could be revolving around like places of higher learning, like universities and colleges and that sort of thing. But seeds got planted, or something was initiated around the January new moon in Capricorn. This may be related to the new moon eclipse that happened in Gemini a couple of weeks ago too, in some ways. But In any case, there's a culmination point being reached here in regarding these ninth house themes. And so maybe this is like a course of study is reaching a conclusion. Maybe it's something you've been working on publishing for that whole time is now ready to see the light of day, right? Maybe something relating to, like, maybe you've been teaching a course since January that's now, a college course or something like that, that's now coming to a conclusion. Maybe this could even be related to you kind of taking on some new belief system in some way, and now it's reaching this point, like a turning point, or there could be some emotions attached to this in some way, shape, or form. Full moons often bring up our emotions. So maybe it's a trip that you were wanting to take and you couldn't. So now maybe that's coming to pass, for example. So those are all some things that are possibilities, Taurus, for you as this full moon culminates in your ninth house. And so listen to the intro so you don't miss, the context, the wider context of things. And we're going to move to Aries now, where Aries, this full moon is illuminating your 10th house of your public life, of career, of worldly ambitions, of the legacy you wish to leave, of your relationship to authority and your own authority and authority figures. And so something that transpired at the beginning of this year is now reaching next level, is now culminating, is now coming up for release in some way, shape, or form. And it may be quite emotional because it is a full moon, but there may be also cause for, some optimism or a small celebration in some way, because we do have the support of Jupiter. But ultimately, this could be something like a career move, right? Like you've been contemplating a career move in some way, and now it's coming to pass. Or you've been vying for a raise, and now it's coming to pass. Or looking for a new title in some way. Or you are, you were working on gaining some sense of authority, maybe in the work that you do in the world, or in regards to the legacy you wish to leave. And now it's leveling up, right? Or there can even be like a time where it's like you're reconsidering, or you're letting go of an old job or a career path that you thought you were on. And now it's, you're releasing that in some way. This could be retirement, quite literally, for some people. So, there's other things, but that really gives you the crux of it. These 10th house themes, right? And so there could be some tension between like home, like your roots even, and your place in, in the outer world, like between like private life and public life, for example, or work-life balance kind of thing. There could be a little bit of tension going on there as well, and a need for balance for you, Aries. So I'm going to move on to Pisces now. Pisces, for you, this full moon is culminating in your 11th house. So something's coming to pass that began around January of this year at the new moon in Capricorn, and maybe even connected to something that transpired a couple weeks ago at the new moon eclipse in Gemini. But something was initiated, some seeds were planted at the beginning of this moon cycle back in January in the Capricorn area of your chart that is now needing to be let go of, release, natural conclusion, or it's bearing fruit in some way. There's a turning point, and that has to do with the group. It has to do with your friendship groups, potentially, people that are your allies or supporters, your hopes and dreams for the future, and the people that can help you achieve those ultimately is the 11th house. And so that's where this full moon is culminating. There could be some emotional stuff coming up, like maybe there's emotional reunions with friends that you wanted to connect with back in January, but it's only now happening, because of COVID or whatever. Maybe, you started to build some alliances in some way back in January, and now those are starting to bear fruit, right? Maybe something was initiated with regards to your sort of vision for the future, and now it's reaching next level. Or maybe something in that regard is needing to be released and let go of as well, because it's the full moon. So this can involve, because it's on the axis of 5th, 11th, and I don't know why I'm prompted to say this, but it might be relevant to somebody. But it could have to do with like your kids' friends too, in some way, because 5th house is kids, among other things, or individual contributions and collaborations. Okay, so, and Pisces, obviously Jupiter is still in your sign until the end of July before it retrogrades back into Aquarius. And so that's lending you some buoyancy and some support and some cause for, even cautious optimism kind of thing, and hope. Okay, that's for you. Last but not least, we've got Aquarius, and the camera has not run out. So knock on wood, we get through you, Aquarius. Aquarius, you've got this full moon culminating in your 12th house. So this is like a private area, kind of, where it's like things that are happening behind closed doors. And that could be quite literally behind closed physical doors, or places that are tucked away from the world, even things like hospitals and spiritual retreat centers and rehab facilities and stuff like that. Or how you go into retreat in solitude in your own space, or in your own head, and how you recuperate and relax and that kind of thing. But it's also potentially having to do with, the things that are coming up from the unconscious or the unseen realms in some way, even your dreams. It can have to do with your capacity, which we all have, for self-sabotage in some way, right? Some bad habits, maybe. That it's time to release and to let go of, because ultimately that's what full moons are. And so something began back in January. In this 12th house area, something was instigated, initiated. Seeds were planted. And now it's this time in the cycle where that's either bearing fruit, or it's needing to be released, or there's some emotions bubbling up from underneath that need to, are tweaking you to the fact that some emotional release needs to go on here. Or some kind of turning point in some way in relation to those 12th house themes that I just spoke to. So, maybe you were planning on going on retreat back in January, but it couldn't happen then. So it's happening now. Maybe something was initiated back in January that was, private or secret in some way, or not for everybody's knowledge. And now it's whatever that is coming to a natural conclusion, or reaching a point of release in some way. It could be, things like maybe even like involving like spiritual pursuits, like meditation or something like that's some kind of practice that you got off the ground back in January, and now it's reaching this natural conclusion, or leveling up, or a release, or you're changing things, or you're letting go of something in that regard, right? Something like that could be happening as well. Or you've maybe just had plans for taking some time off, and now you're able to do that. It's coming to fruition, so to speak, with the full moon. So, there's always more I could say, but that gives you a good idea. This could trigger it's triggering potentially this axis of health in some way for you, Aquarius rising. And so there could be something, going on as far as that is concerned. But again, it's connected to the new moon back in January of this year, and maybe on some level to the new moon eclipse in Gemini a couple of weeks ago as well. Okay, so we made it through all 12 signs. Thanks for joining me here. And, I'm wishing you all the best for this full moon. And I will catch you next week, I think. I'm pretty sure. We're going to be taking a little bit of time off when the kids finish school, but I don't know exactly what that's going to look like yet. So I'll keep you posted. All right. And the best way for me to do that is if you come join me on Facebook and Instagram, I'll say something about it there. And if you join my mailing list at astrologymaven.com. Okay. Take care. I'll talk to you later. Bye for now.